This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your dearest friends at the BBC. This is, as I think you probably know by now, we're very sinful members of the public. There are so many of you come to tell your tales of deceit, debauchery and deception. And they all need a little bit of forgiveness from you, the parish of Radio 2. On the other side of the confessional curtain, your regular voices of reason, Joe, and the nation's moral compass, that'll be Bobby. Of course.
This week's confession collection includes Roger's story, Murder on the Farm Floor. We have Bob's waggy tale, Good Golly Miss Doggy, and Tony's mid-70s gargantuan gatefold yarn, Love Me, Love My Prog. And we also have a classic confession from the crypt featuring an exam-bothering accidental tannoy announcer.
But first we start with Roger's confession, Oops, I squid it again.
Please be seated.
Tonight's comes from Sebastian. All right, Sebastian. Father Simon, I've often thought about confessing my sin, but I've never actually revealed what happened to anyone outside my own family or close circle of friends at school. However, maybe now at the age of 51, it's time to come clean about my shady past. It's 1984. I was attending a private school somewhere in Leicestershire that looked and felt more like Hogwarts from Harry Potter. As boarders at the school, we very quickly cottoned on to the fact that unless you like to play table tennis, make phone calls from the communal telephone box, listen to records in the common room, or go for runs in the evening, life was going to be really boring. So unless we broke the rules, once in a while, we never broke the boredom. One day in the biology lab, we were all given a small squid to dissect. It's all in the name of science.
Bobby already looking very, very...
Well, no, it's like The Apprentice, isn't
disapproving.
it?
Well,
They had a squid, didn't they? Did they?
Didn't they?
They had the big squid, yeah.
I wasn't watching on that one.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, this is a small squid, and the job is to dissect it. And at the end of the lesson, we had to put the remains of the squid into a bucket, where no doubt the teacher would eventually dispose of them in the school incinerator. But I didn't give my squid back, because I just knew there'd be too much fun to be had here, and it would probably end up in someone's bed. Anyway, I just wasn't sure who would be lucky enough to get it. There were 18 of us in our dormitory, which was made out of the top of an old church. That was part of the school, with arched ceilings and large 20-foot stained glass windows at one end. There had been a growing sense of discontent recently in the dorm, as many of our boys' toys, useful things like coffee cup heaters, magazines, binoculars, catapults and penknives, had been confiscated by a boy called Jenkins. Jenkins was a quiet chap and a straight-A student, and although he didn't talk much to us, we had to respect him as he was our dormitory monitor, the dorm monitor, who had a room in our dorm which he always kept locked. That evening I peered over the top of the ceiling of his room, and I realised that if just one of the insulation panels could be removed from in between the wooden rafters, I could slip down, retrieve all of our loot, and give them all back to the respective owners, all without having to unlock the door. Well, I borrowed the Swiss Army knife from an Italian student, obviously, and not only unscrewed Jenkins' main light, but also removed a panel, slipped down as the rest of the boys watched on, and emptied his cupboard of his ill-gotten gains. "Chuck me the squid," I say. "What squid?" says the boy at the other side who'd been catching the goods. "The one in my cupboard in the bag. Which squid do you think?" He threw me the remains of the squid, and I placed it carefully at the foot of Jenkins' bed, being careful to make it look completely undisturbed, so as he would actually have to get into the bed to find it in the first place. I left the cupboard door open like a compromised safe to draw his attention away from the bed on his return, and slipped athletically back through the wooden beams and replaced the panel. There was silence as Jenkins returned from the sixth form student union at around 11 p.m. and unlocked his door. We saw the torchlight scan the room briefly, seeing what we were up to, before he realised what he thought had happened, muttering, very clever, and shut the door. He'd realised that we'd emptied his cupboard. Just a few moments later, the door opened again, and we heard a very loud and slightly scared sound of a grown boy crying, followed by a shriek, followed by more crying, followed by the sound of Jenkins running away. Well, whoops of excitement and laughter filled the dormitory, and for the next 15 minutes we had the biggest pillow fight you've ever seen. Hooray! We had more fun in those following few minutes than we had at any time in the whole of our years at school. The housemaster entered the room some 20 minutes later and was clearly not in the mood for taking prisoners. He wanted the ringleader's head on a plate, and he wanted it now. I was about to step forward when he said, "It can't be anyone like Roger. He's 6'4" and massive. It has to be someone small and lithe." When I say Roger, I should have said Sebastian, which is the name that I've changed.
Yeah, we got
I'll
that.
do that line again. It can't be anyone. It's kind of spoilt the effect of the moan.
yeah.
It can't be anyone like Sebastian. He's 6'4" and massive. It has to be someone small and lithe. Anyway, says Sebastian. It seems like I was off the hook. But because no one grasped me up, and obviously no one else admitted it, we all had to do 5 laps of the athletic track after breakfast the next morning, all 18 of us, because I did not come forward. To this day, I haven't been able to forget about the trauma that Jenkins had to endure, and how cold, wet and slippery the squid must have felt in his bed sheets on his bare feet. And I wonder whether the suckers adhered to his bare skin, and whether any of them clung to his feet as he ran down the corridor. I honestly never meant to upset him, and I come before you now, seeking forgiveness.
Hang on, honestly never meant to upset him? Excuse me?
Well, correctly observed there, Joe. I think you could make a DC one day. I think that's probably right. What do you say?
What do I say? I think, obviously you were meant to upset him. Obviously
That
you
was the point.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't possibly be forgiven, I don't think. You obviously didn't mind doing the 5 laps outside. It was completely worth the upset that you caused to Jenkins. So there you go. So, yeah, not
That would have
forgiven.
been really disgusting. You imagine putting your foot in the bed and then feeling the suckers of a dead squid.
I cannot bear fish of any kind, anything like the thought.
So this really
Fingers?
like the
them
worst
touching them,
thing.
fish fingers.
They all right?
They're not too slimy.
Okay.
They're okay. As long as they don't taste of fish, that's fine.
How about chicken? How about chicken? Yeah,
No,
chicken.
chicken's not a fish, so that's okay.
Okay, how about fish goujons?
As long as they're not too fishy, that's fine.
Right.
Anything slimy, I'm not particularly interested. So the idea of putting my toe into a squid, not so much.
Bobby Pryor.
The thing is, the squid was already asleep, isn't it?
It had donated
squid
its life
farm
to
in the sky.
science.
Asleep in
the-
a special way.
Yeah, so the fact it was asleep already and it was fine and the squid was fine. I imagine you boys just basically played tricks on each other all the time. And actually you all had fun, so the very fact that everyone had to do the laps, basically everyone was part of it. I just want to say that I think in this situation I'm going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
Our guest on the show today is Rick Wakeman, who'll be here just after 6:30 to talk about his new record. But he's actually here early. Hello, Rick, by the way.
Hello, I'm a bit worried now.
Yeah, well, because you've had an illustrious career, and I'm sure there are many things that people might have written in about. A confession involving Rick Wakeman, but you can relax.
Thank you, Simon.
Here we go. Simon and the Collective. The year is 1973, for most of which I was 12. This confession, by the way, comes from Tony. Okay. Thank you, Tony. I live with my parents, Joyce and Henry, my older sister Jacqueline, who was 16, and my older brother Michael, who was 17. Music has always been an important part of my life, both listening and playing. But in 1973, I was very much a novice and hadn't really found a genre of music that I was comfortable with. Michael was into rock and prog rock, so Genesis, The Who, Family, Pink Floyd, that kind of thing would often be playing in the house. One day Michael came home with a new record called Tales from Topographic Ocean. Rick, why are you wincing like that?
Yeah, no, go on, please carry on, Simon. That's fine.
He'd just bought by a progressive rock band called Yes. Do you remember them?
Yes, I remember recording the album too.
He rushed home from work and went straight into the lounge where Dad's high-spec stereo system was, so he could play it before Dad got home. I was in the next room playing with my toys, but could clearly hear the music that was playing. Okay, so here we go. This is the Revealing Science of God dance. Is that right, Rick?
Something like that, yeah. Revealed something, I'm not quite sure.
That's you.
That's me, sir.
Anyway, so the confession continues from Tony. I've never heard anything like it. All types of instruments were in there. And not just guitar, drums and bass, but synthesizers, which I'd never heard before. So many interesting sounds, and all courtesy of Rick Wakeman. I was particularly taken by the way the record started. The singer singing in a monotone key, which built up in intensity until the rest of the band came in. I was spellbound. Every day that week, he would come home and go straight into the lounge to play it again. I duly sat in the other room and listened. Although he listened to the whole record, he would always start with the intro on side one. And so on. It doesn't fade like that. That's just me doing the edit fade. At school that week, all I could think about was this record. And I decided one day, when I got home, I would investigate it further. So one day when I knew my brother was going to be home a bit later, I went into the living room. When I found the record, I was amazed by the cover. The artwork was stunning. It opened like a book, and inside were all the lyrics, because that's what you did back in 1973. It was then that I decided that I wanted to hear it close up. I switched on the stereo system and adjusted the volume. I took the record out of the left side of the cover and removed it from its protective sleeve. The lights in the room reflected in the grooves. It was immaculate. Carefully, I placed the record on the turntable. Started it revolving. I lifted up the arm, slowly placed the needle on the spinning disc. In anticipation, I sat back in the chair and enjoyed it again. That's more yes on Radio 2 than recently.
Than ever. Yeah.
Than ever. Yeah. Suddenly, the front door closed with a bang. Michael has come home early. I shot up and I made a grab for the needle. I picked it off the record, but in my state of panic, the needle slipped from my grip and jumped across the record, the noise thumping through the speakers. Ah! This is a disaster. I reached over and grabbed the arm and placed it back on its stand. I removed the record and placed it back in its sleeve, then back in the cover. At that point, my sister Jacqueline came in, asking what the noise was, and I realised it was her that had come home, not Michael. Oh, nothing, I said. When she'd gone, I replaced the record in the same place that I'd found it. A bit later, Michael did return, and as usual, went into the lounge to play the record again. I sat in the next room, listening. The silence was deafening. Finally, I heard the stereo switch on, a record being removed from its sleeve and placed on the turntable, and then the needle gently touched the record. But this time, it was slightly different. Remember that, when you could damage the music? Oh, that scratch. Oh, no. What on earth? Shouted Michael, or words to that effect. Who has done that? Who has scratched my record? Mum went from the kitchen to see what the commotion was and was told about the gouge that had appeared in this new beautiful record. It was okay yesterday. Who has done this? The door opened and Mum was standing there with my brother, red-faced with anger, standing behind her. Did you scratch Michael's new record? She asked. I looked up with my best sad eyes and said, No, Ma, it wasn't me. Whether she believed me or not, we will never know, but she promised to buy Michael a replacement. Needless to say, I never touched any of my brother's records again, and I've never owned up to it until this moment right here. It has never been mentioned since. So clearly, I need to ask for forgiveness, not from my brother, as Mum did indeed buy him a new copy a couple of days later. I also don't seek forgiveness from my teachers at school, who, for that 1 week, found me to be a bit preoccupied with something other than schoolwork. I really need forgiveness from my mum because I lied and she had to buy Michael a new copy of the record, even though I think she probably did know it was me. And I guess I should probably apologise to Yes for damaging their work of art. Although, to be honest, Tony, they got 2 sales out of it, so I think that's fine. We're going to finish. We'll come to Rick last, but Lisa, do you forgive Tony for this crime against music?
Yeah, I'm really glad he's got that off his chest. He must feel very free.
No.
That's a kind of a prog reference.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's see if Bobby can manage that.
Oh, Tony, I know you were only little, and I love about it, your brother was playing music, and you went, I like this. I just wish you'd have asked him. I wish you'd have gone, I really love that. Will you play it for me? You should have asked, but because you were little, this time you're forgiven.
But it was that horrible thing you can damage and scratch your music, something which this new generation will not find out anyway. But it's basically all falls down to Rick here. What do you make of that, Rick? Do you forgive Tony or not?
I thought it sounded better. I mean, with so many weird things that we used to do percussion-wise, and it possibly is something that we might have thought about doing for a later album. You never know.
What, adding a scratch?
Yeah.
So when I mentioned this particular album, Topographic Oceans, you went, oh.
Well, no, it just reminded me, when we recorded it, John and myself wanted to record in the country, because it was a big thing then to record in the country. Steve and Chris wanted to record in the city in London, and Alan used to sit on the fence and go, I'll go wherever. So we decided to bring the country to the city, and we went into Morgan Studios. And when I arrived...
Is this a long anecdote?
No, it's nearly there. We had everything from haystacks, bales of hay, to like picket fences. We even had a cow with an electronic udder going backwards and forwards.
Those were the days, eh?
It was indeed.
I don't know what to say about that.
So you forgive Tony?
Oh, absolutely forgive him.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Tony's confession, Love Me, Love My Prog, which indirectly involved Tuesday's guest, Rick Wakeman. It was a stormy night on the topographic ocean in that confession.
And as we found out on the People's Verdict, which here features 2 Joe stand-ins from this week...
Sorry.
Tony's story confirmed that owners of rare vinyl are an unforgiving bunch.
Here's one from Louise, who describes herself as an innocent from West Wales, then. Not forgiven. My young cousin landed on our record player and scratched my first ever LP purchase in its first playing, and it was the Moody Blues, A Question of Balance, ironically. And it's still in my grudge bank, which is a thing that I'm mad for, a grudge bank.
It was Lisa Tarbuck channeling the still smouldering anger of a miffed Moody Blues fan. Still to come, was this confession a case of murder most foul, or, sorry about this, a natural hending? Mrs. Leamington was struck by lightning. Mark found her dead in the mud and picked her up by the leg. She was old and scrawny anyway. He wouldn't put her in the bin. So Mark threw Mrs. Leamington into the woods. So before we go any further, we should reassure you that Mrs. Leamington was a chicken. Obviously. But it still sounds like someone's stay at Cold Comfort Farm won't be generating a 5-star review on TripAdvisor. And from farm to village green, it's now time to stroll over to the parish notice board.
I have Jamie, who reveals a new way of enjoying the podcast. Jamie says, morning all. Having been alerted to the delivery of your latest offering, I settled into my long commute home to listen in. Fumbling around the dashboard in the twilight, I inadvertently pressed ×1 on the screen when pressing play and slowed your speech down to half speed.
Yes.
So it sounded like the 3 of you had all been at the cold and flu remedies, which indeed I think we probably had. I was laughing so much that I almost had to pull into the hard shoulder. Once home, I excitedly showed my wife and kids this new feature while chortling manically to myself and wanting them to give it a try. They looked at me, no doubt wishing that I had my own personal mute button, which they could use to shut me up instead, and turn back to the TV.
The thing is about that, the different speeds that you can do when you're listening to the podcast is there's something about it. It's not just playing it slower because it changes the pitch. It just makes it sound as though we are absolutely stoned. I do recommend listening to this podcast at the wrong speed because it does, as Jamie correctly said, it does sound as though we're all completely been on the beers or the flu remedies. And just to illustrate the point, here is a bit of this week's podcast at the wrong speed.
You imagine putting your foot in the bed and then feeling the suckers of a dead squid. I cannot bear fish of any kind, anything. Like the thoughts of this ring is the worst thing. Fish fingers. They're not too slimy, okay. They're okay. As long as they don't taste of fish, that's fine. How about chicken? How about chicken? Yeah, chicken. No, chicken's not fish, so that's okay. Okay, how about fish goujons? As long as they're not too fishy, that's fine. Anything slimy, I'm not particularly interested. So the idea of putting my toe into a squid, not so much.
There you go, see?
That is fantastic.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
And all we've been drinking is water. promise. What have you got, Bobby?
Well, I'm sure everyone will be aware that our studio has taken on the appearance of a doctor's waiting room in the last couple of weeks, with presenters and staff all succumbing to an autumnal lurgy to some degree. So,
To illustrate a point, I'll just choke.
so it's with some sympathy that I bring your attention to this sickbed submission from 12-year-old Martha. Dear Father Simon, Joe and Bobby, I'm writing to you from lovely Shropshire, where I'm currently listening to you in bed at home. My brother, a big fan of yours, has just had an awful cold and has passed it on to me. Oh, I'm with you there. The only thing that has cheered me up is your amazing podcast. Me and my mum always listen to the show on the way to athletics on Mondays. Thank you for cheering me up and making me laugh.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Martha, and I hope you get better soon. Thing is, some people's cold disappears within days, and then some people's hangs around, and then
Everyone has a weak point, don't they? Something that happens to them. So yours is your chest and your throat.
and I just cough all the time.
Yeah.
What's your
Bobby?
weak
Well,
point?
mine's my back, but I had this cold for a month. I really felt really unwell for quite a long time.
What's
your
weak-
back?
Yeah, my back.
Yeah.
But when you have a cold, it goes to your back?
No, sorry. So it's my back is my weak point,
Right.
not a cold. No, I don't have a cold. No, just this one.
Which
Do
has
you have
gone
a
on
weak
forever.
point, Joe? What's your weak point?
I just get really, I get sinus problems, which is like the unsexiest thing you can ever get. So it just goes on forever and ever and ever, and it always has done. I once had my sinuses washed out, which I think was quite an old-fashioned thing to do, and it was the worst thing I have ever had done in terms of medical interventions. Awful.
Really?
Awful. Oh my God.
I have noticed on the chemist shelf something that says sinus rinse. It doesn't
Yeah,
look fun.
no, don't do it. Just
Sinus
honestly,
rinse.
Yeah.
you can imagine what goes on, just and what comes out.
Did they hold you upside down in the bathtub?
Pretty much.
Okay.
It flows.
Oh.
It's awful.
I would tentatively suggest that a colonoscopy might be less pleasant, but anyway.
But you can't see it, can
Well, you can if you,
Okay.
You can if they offer you that option.
you? Okay.
I think equally they're both horrid.
Do you think? Anyway, I wonder if you can have your grudge bank washed.
Well, there's lots of room in mine. I don't need it washed at the moment.
And by the way, do remember, if you want to get in touch with us here on the podcast, either to share one of your own, to rediscover one that made you laugh out loud, just to let us know what you think, then do email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Okay, grubby part of the notice board. It's the non-compliant confessions. It's the one that, in the opinion of the producer of the show, they're not good enough. They're too dodgy. They're just disgusting, really, and so they don't get on. However, they do get on to this bit. First up is from John. John's disgusting tale was inspired by last week's disgusting tale about the student who moved in his girlfriend to the shared flat. But instead of his story ending with the girlfriend eating maggoty jam in the original, in John's tale, it's his friend who suffers in revenge for women's knickers being found everywhere and keeping the housemates up with strange noises, whatever they might be. And John's punishment for his friend? Well, let's just say it involved sneaky helpings of the flatmate's prized whiskey and it being replaced straight from the source. As it were.
Ew.
So I can understand why that, obviously.
Is that necessary? See, that's not necessary, is it?
What?
Well, if someone leaves clothes around, you just go, look, if it's either in the washing bin or it's in the bin. So if it's not in the washing bin, it goes in the bin. There you go, lose your clothes. Really simple. No argument, done, dusted.
Shift them.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
We also have Bo's confession, which has been rejected, not just because it's disgusting, but also it's downright immoral and dangerous. So fed up with being the on-duty police officer who constantly had to answer wrong numbers from people looking for the doctor's surgery, Bo decided to take revenge on the next person to call. He made an appointment with an elderly gentleman who dialed the wrong number for the next day at 9:30, but informed him that as there was a nasty stomach bug going around, the man would also be required to present a stool sample upon arrival at the doctor's surgery. You can only imagine the receptionist's face the next morning, and also the embarrassment and the anger of the older man who actually didn't have an appointment at all. Just, here's my stool, so to speak.
I can imagine how that did not get on the air. Because I know what face Bobby would have pulled halfway through that.
As long as they didn't send it in to us.
What, the stool?
Can we move on?
Anyway.
Okay. Graham's story doesn't make it because even though you thought it'd be fun to wind up the hitchhikers you'd picked up on a long journey, we will never condone the fact that you told them you were close friends with a pair of notorious serial killers who lived nearby. That's not getting on.
That's certainly not getting on. That's
No.
dangerous and weird.
Anyway, yes, and Bobby looks very cross about that. I should stress that the above confessions will not receive absolution in office hours and probably out of hours too. Please send yours that might get on the air or might not, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
And we'll move on from watered down whiskey and terrorising tourists, and we'll get back to the one that we're very happy made the cuts. There's not much fun in the country for Roger and his confession, murder on the farm floor.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's comes from Mark, first of the week. Thank you, Mark. Dear Father Simon and the Angels of Redemption. My name is Mark, and my alleged crime took place in rural Cambridgeshire in the 70s when I was a teenage lad. The fact he says alleged crime clearly means he's kind of ducking out of it. Feels no sense of responsibility. Mum came from a farming family, and I spent most holidays on the farm helping out. Our home was a converted barn with fields and woodlands to the rear. We kept chickens, which my sister rescued from a local battery, and they took great delight in naming them and painting their eggs. For example, one was called Eternity, as it had no tail feathers and was therefore endless. Another, and I don't actually get this unless I'm being really stupid, another was called Brother because apparently it always had dirty feet. Why would that?
Brother?
Am I missing out on something? Is that rude? Anyway, all these chickens and hens were named properly, and at the centre of this tale was a small elderly bantam named Mrs. Leamington. Also, you need to know our 12-year-old cousin Julie had come to stay, and it's fair to say Julie absolutely loved animals. Late one evening, when Julie was staying over, we had a dramatic thunderstorm. The girls sat inside watching the rain running down the windows and counted the time between lightning and thunder to work out how far away the storm was. After one brilliant flash, they saw that the chickens were out and running about, and so I was dispatched in the rain to get them safely back into the hutch. As I was rounding them up, I discovered Mrs. Leamington, motionless. Sadly, the storm had overwhelmed her, and she had passed, somewhat undignified, face down in the mud. These things happen. I was then faced with a decision. It was raining hard. I had a handful of eggs and a dead chicken to deal with. I considered my options. We had agreed that we would not eat our chickens, so that option was dismissed quickly. I considered burying her, but decided it wasn't ideal conditions for digging a hole. I picked her up by one leg and thought for a moment about the dustbins. Then suddenly I remembered we had foxes living in the neighbouring woodland, and a little idea started to form. I decided to run a few hundred yards into the woodland, away from the house, and simply throw our departed bird into the undergrowth to let nature take its inevitable course. Bobby's looking very distressed, but this is the way nature has it.
I know the circle of life, but you don't know that she might have just had a little sleep.
Anyway.
In fact, there was no heartbeat. Might have had something to give it away.
Unknown to me, however, our Julie, aged 12, had watched the whole escapade. And so, when Auntie Wendy, her mum, came to collect Julie, things took a turn for the worse. Auntie Wendy asked Julie if she'd had a nice day, and after listing all sorts of wonderful things, such as punting on the river and eating strawberry ice cream, she then turned to her account of the holiday's low spot. "Mum," started Julie, "there was a massive thunderstorm. Mrs. Leamington was struck by lightning. Mark found her dead in the mud and picked her up by the leg. He said she was old and scrawny anyway. He wouldn't put her in the bin. Anyway, her voice was quite animated at this point, so Mark threw Mrs. Leamington into the woods for the foxes." Now, I should say here that Auntie Wendy had no idea who Mrs. Leamington was, and for a long, long time, she simply stared at me, unable to breathe. What had she allowed her daughter to get wrapped up in? Had this branch of the family gone feral? How did this Mrs. Leamington die, and how could this boy have had the strength to throw her to the foxes? How did you know this Mrs. Leamington, Aunt Wendy eventually says. "Oh, she'd been around for ages," I say. "Always quite a bit scrawny." More silence before I released her from her puzzlement and worry. "Oh, it's all right, Auntie. Mrs. Leamington was a chicken." Well, she looked so relieved. It looked like she'd won the jackpot. So in summary, says Mark, I throw myself at your mercy and seek forgiveness for my rather practical solution to the conundrum. I also seek forgiveness for causing distress to my cousin, who, despite numerous explanations of my decision-making, never fully bought into the logic. And, of course, to Auntie Wendy, who, even if it was only for a brief moment of time, did think that Mrs. Leamington was not a chicken, but a fully fledged adult. Which you can understand. If someone says Mrs. Leamington died in the storm, we thought of feeding her to the foxes. It would take a while. Anyway, it's Mark's story. What do you think, Joe?
I think Bobby should go first because she's made copious notes about this and
Okay,
has had
all right.
the most extraordinary range of faces you could ever see.
Bobby's going
I
first.
was really, really concerned. Thanks, Joe. I was concerned, but actually, he seemed to do all the right things, and I don't mind the little bit of kind of time delay before you put her out of her misery, because actually, it's a really funny story. It's simple. It's fine. And actually, the chickens had a lovely end, considering they were rescued in the first place, and the foxes got fed. No harm done, no distress, just natural death, and then,
Yeah. It's not a bad way to
moving
go.
on. No, it's not. As long as she definitely wasn't asleep, that's fine. You're forgiven, Mark.
Well, imagine if she was asleep, maybe that being chucked over the fence,
Would
she
have
woke
woken her
up
up.
and then she ran off and had a lovely life out in the wild.
Until the fox got her.
Well, maybe she evaded the foxes and lived happily ever
Let's
after.
hope so, shall we?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, Joe.
Yes. No, I'll forgive as well because it's the circle of life, and he was just letting nature take its course and do what it should do.
I think that's the way. Good old Mrs. Leamington, eh? But why would a chicken called Brother have dirty feet? I'm sure there's something dodgy going on there.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's tale comes from Bob. Thank you, Bob. Dear Simon and the Sisters of Mercy, I ask forgiveness for an unforgivable act of deception in a story that involves myself and 3 fellow scout leaders. We are all seasoned hikers and every year commit to a new and stretching hiking challenge in the name of scouting. On the day in question, we're on a 16-mile circular hike from Clapham Village over Ingleborough via Gaping Hill and back again to Clapham Village. And it was on our descent off Ingleborough that we came across a rather distressed family. They had lost their beloved Labrador somewhere in the hills as their son had let it off the leash. And I could see that they were visibly upset about the loss of their beloved pet. We told them we'd seen no sign of a Labrador, but exchanging numbers, we said we'd contact them if we came across the dog. We have 2 dog lovers in this, well, 3 dog lovers, but 2 dog owners here. 1 dog owner, 1 former dog
Thanks for
owner.
reminding me.
Sorry about that.
Grief. Is this item live?
Move on.
About 3 miles further on, we are in good spirits as we were only a short distance from reaching our parked cars, and it was at this point we passed through a farmyard. As we walked through, we came across an exhausted-looking Labrador, and we looked at each other in disbelief. However, when we tried to call the family, we found we had no mobile reception, and after 10 minutes of calling to no avail, the general consensus was that we were knackered and we should get to our cars and head home. However, I had to protest at this rather selfish attitude from the others. We were scout leaders and should always do the right thing. And the right thing in this case would be to reunite this family with their beloved pet. Grudgingly, my colleagues agreed to try and reunite family and pet, although there was a great deal of muttering under their breath. Excuse me. And so we led the dog back up into the hills to find its owner. But this proved quite tricky, as frankly we had to more or less drag the dog back up into the hills, whilst it took frequent breaks to leave its scent. We travelled miles and miles back into the dales in the general direction of where the family had headed, and as we progressed, we made every attempt to attract the family's attention by sharp blasts on our whistles and much shouting. After what seemed like an eternity, we eventually caught sight of the father coming over the horizon. I know you're ahead of me. At this, our clamour reached a crescendo, and he spotted us and headed down the hillside toward us. We then spotted his wife coming into view, followed not far after by a figure of a dog. As the father approached, we shouted with glee that we had found their dog, at which point he responded that that wasn't their dog, which could see they'd clearly found, and in fact it wasn't even the right colour. My fellow scout leaders looked at me with a, well, what do we do now expression. After a short and heated chat, I explained that their suggestion that we leave the dog on the hillside to find its own way home was unacceptable and not the scouting way, and so we led the dog back off the hillside, back towards the farm. After another 6 miles, I'm exhausted, we caught sight of two ladies walking towards us, calling out, "Teddy! Teddy!" Of course, these were the owners of the mutt we'd inadvertently dog-napped. And they were moved to tears about being reunited with their beloved pet. Oh, Teddy! They embraced each of us, thanking us for rescuing him, and told us it was very unlike Teddy to leave the confines of their farm, and they'd been looking for ages and they'd been so worried. I looked at my fellow scout leaders for a response, but none was forthcoming. Hesitantly, I said, "Oh, we found him wandering about the hillside and chose to try and reunite him with his owners." Anyway, they were delighted. He swallowed it hook, line and sinker, and they embraced us all again. Father Simon, clearly I need forgiveness for misleading these good people that we had rescued their beloved pet, because actually we'd dog-napped it in the first place. This was clearly against every principle of the scouting movement, and for this I feel deeply, deeply sorry. Well, there aren't any losers in this. It seems to me, apart from the dog that got dragged all the way up the hill. Paddy, you go first here.
Yes, I think you've summed it up beautifully. There are no losers. Dogs, they like walking. They like to walk with people. They like to walk on their own. The dog went up the hill. The dog came down the hill. The lost dog was found.
Yes.
Twice. This is a story that's happy. It should inspire every dog listening.
And should inspire, and well done for the scout. It's good about the scouting principles here, that they'll just do the right thing. Anyway, Sister Bobby's looking puzzled and annoyed.
Well, just no.
Yes.
Because at least there were 3 scouts, and at least 2 of the 3 scouts thought that the original dog, exhausted in the farmyard, they shouldn't bother, they should go back to their cars. One of them said, no, we need to do the right thing. So
Yes.
2 of the scouts shouldn't really be scouts. And then, of course, when they went back to the farmyard, with the second dog that wasn't lost, they pretended to have found the dog, so they basically told a fib. But the other thing I would cross with is they got the description wrong. They're scouts, so they couldn't even get an accurate description of the dog, because the dog was a different colour. And haven't finished yet. Okay, just wait.
In your place.
Also, now I've forgotten the things.
But does that mean you're finished then?
It might mean I finished, but they're not forgiven.
Just think of the misery for that woman. Simon gave her a Scottish accent.
Mm-hmm.
And which we won't repeat.
I never did.
You did. The woman who lost her dog, she said, "Oh." And just imagine if she'd known that her dog had been taken by strangers, that would have upset her. She didn't need to know that.
Thing is, here was the second thing. They got the description wrong. When they met this first dog in the farmyard, am I going on too long?
No.
Why didn't they knock on the farm door and say, just can I check with you? Is this your dog? So
Hindsight.
first of all, no, it's not hindsight.
Hindsight.
These are basic scouting rules. I think they're very poor scouts.
Where in the Scout Woggle book does it say what to do?
Common sense. Common sense. Scouting is about common sense.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Bob's fake pet rescue confession, which we called Good Golly, Miss Doggy. And that brought this appalled response, as read by Paddy O'Connell, who was filling in for me on Wednesday.
Andy Scouse Nelson, outrageous, not forgiven. Swap the dog for a car, and, which, by the way, is less important than a dog, they're in the nick.
Right, I'm not quite sure that works, does it?
Well, because Andy Scouse Nelson's making the point, if they took a car up the hill, that's nicking. If you take a dog up the hill, we're forgiving them.
But you would never drag a car up the hill to reunite it with its worried owners, would you?
Andy's just asking you to imagine.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Paddy has a great sense of Radio 4 authority.
He really
doesn't
does,
he?
yeah.
You know, when he's saying it, I just think it's all true. I think. Anyway, and thanks to Paddy for filling in for Joe this week.
Yes,
and
thank
me,
you.
And me last week. Anyway, that's it from this week's batch of confessions. Send in your own to confessions@bbc.co.uk. We're not done yet. Let's dig out another confession from the crypt.
Today's confession request comes from Justine, who says, could you please find the confession where the student goes into a booth and starts making announcements, not realising they're being played out loud across the university tannoy system. The announcements are boomed out in an exam room, disturbing the students. It was played originally when I was on holiday in France with our children Hannah and Sam and my husband Graham, who first introduced us to the Confessions podcast by playing this very one. We laughed so much as a family, and after that I started listening regularly.
Okay, well, Justine, you'll be pleased to know we managed to find it. So, from Harry, here is A Noisy Tannoy, a Noise.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the Compassionate Few. I like that. I beg forgiveness for an incident that happened whilst I was at university back in the year 2000. You see, Father Mayo, ever since I can remember, my mother had always chastised me for never being able to sit still. It drove her mad. She always warned me one day it would be my undoing. My mother, it turns out, was wiser than I thought. As part of my degree, I had to create a short film, which was the major piece of coursework within a unit of documentaries. I had eagerly teamed up with a small band of 4 other students, and we'd elected to do a documentary about the 17th century Pendle witches, which was cunningly entitled The Pendle Witch Project. Despite early versions of cinematic grandeur, it was soon clear... despite early visions of cinematic grandeur, it was soon clear on looking at the rushes it was going to be as dire as the title suggested. This was not helped by the fact that we were forced to edit said documentary as a 5-man team using very old editing equipment. Equipment that was only really designed for one person. So we took it in turns. With hindsight, this is probably where the problems began. The editing studio resided on the 2nd floor of an ugly building on campus. It had no windows and was remarkably cramped. All that there was this editing kit, shelves full of media-related bumf, and a large round desk, which also was a sound desk. It was the middle of the afternoon, and we had spent almost all day in the studio editing and arguing over whether or not it mattered that you could clearly see a Ford Granada in the background of what was meant to be a historical reenactment. I had finished my stint in the hot seat and took my place at the back of the room, where I could expect to spend the next couple of hours peering over someone else's shoulder whilst they toiled equally fruitlessly to finish this film. I started to get bored. Looking around the room for something to distract me, I am a fidget, you'll remember, my eyes fell upon the sound desk. I'd never used one before. It looked quite cool, I thought, and on it I spotted a microphone, and below that, a big red button. Oh, now it's going to be very tempting. If ever there was something I shouldn't touch, I thought, this was probably it. Well, I resisted for about a minute, and then I pushed it. Nothing happened. Curiosity satisfied, I returned to watching the documentary Being Crafted. Knowing that the button did nothing, it wasn't long before I was pushing it at fairly regular intervals, just as something to do. At one point, I decided to say into the microphone, in my best radio DJ voice, "Here's one for all you truckers out there." I don't know why I said that, but that's what I did in my best radio DJ voice. Nor do I know why, a few minutes after that, I also decided to press the button and say, Car 67, come in, please. We have you for a pickup. Anyway, I'd heard it on the record. I thought I'd give it a go. And then I tried my pièce de résistance. Now, this all depends whether you remember Float On by the Floaters. So I pressed the red button and said, "Ladies, my name is Larry, and I like a woman that loves everything and everybody. Because I love everybody and everything. And you know what, ladies? If you feel that this is you, then this is what I want you to do. Take my hand and let me take you to Love Land. Let me show you how sweet it could be, sharing your love."
What's going on? This is
Larry.
superb.
He's pressing the button.
Simon, I didn't know you had it. I didn't know you had it in you.
Sharing your love.
How long have you been practicing that, Simon?
It's gone slightly red.
It was about 30 seconds later that all hell broke loose. The studio door was violently flung open and a bearded man in a suit charged in, somewhat out of breath, shouting, "Who the hell is using the wretched tannoy system?" And then the terrifying words, "Don't you know that there are exams on?" No. You see, Simon, it turns out that the button did do something after all. It controlled the broadcast system for the whole northern side of the campus, including several of the big halls in which approximately 200 people were taking their important exams. And every time you pressed the button, it went, and then broadcast whatever it was you were saying.
Just do one of those voices, one sentence. Go on.
"Ladies, I like a woman that loves everything and everybody." Anyway, I heard later that it had caused such a furore that one of the exams had to be extended to make up for the time lost in the distraction. Luckily, none of my fellow documentary makers dobbed me in, and to this day I have carried this shameful burden. Couldn't be difficult to work out
I was going to say
who had done it. I would like to apologise to all those whose exams I probably ruined, and most of all I'd like to apologise to anyone who had to watch the Pendle Witch Project. It's 45 minutes of your life you'll never get back. I humbly seek forgiveness from the collective. Okay, very good. So it's Harry. It's Harry's tale. He was trying to make a documentary. He got bored. He's a fidget. He pressed the red button, pretended to be a DJ and a taxi driver, controller, and then Larry from the Floaters. By the way, if you want to hear, this is
my name is Larry.
This is it.
I like a woman that loves everything.
Everybody.
It doesn't sound anything like you.
No, okay. Anyway, so that was what he was doing. Okay, so let's see what happens.
I do not think that is a shameful burden at all. I think he should be proud of that. I mean, the quality of the broadcast going through that tannoy. I mean, if it sounded anything like you just did, Simon.
Ladies.
He should be very proud. I think it's great and a very, very funny confession. So, Harry, you're completely forgiven.
Okay, Mother Superior now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think probably, if anything, he made the people who were taking these exams, he made them laugh, so they relaxed, so they probably did better than they would have done normally. By the way, I was a very fidgety child myself, to the point where my mother thought I had a disease called St. Vitus dance, and she took me to the doctor, thinking that because I never stopped fidgeting. So I have some sympathy.
I'm a fidget.
Are you?
Absolutely. You drive people mad.
Yeah, I used to be. I'm not so bad now, but I used to be as a child. Anyway, you're utterly forgiven. Very, very funny story. Well done.
Brother Matthew.
Do you know what? Anyone listening to this confession is going to be thinking, if they ever get access to a microphone that's going to have access to a tannoy system, what you're going to want to do is, ladies.
My name is Larry.
And everything.
And everybody.
Oh, that was superb. I love that. And also, how did they not work out it was him? Apparently, he was the only guy in the room with the microphone with the red button. It was obviously him. So I'm definitely going to forgive just because that was hilarious. And it got you doing that voice for a good 30 seconds.
You almost turned into another person. It was quite extraordinary.
It was superb.
A handsome person.
Thank you.
I mean, not that you're not normally.
No,
do you know what I mean?
keep digging. Fidget confessions. I bet I'm sure that there are plenty of people who've got into trouble through being a fidget. Fidgety confessions, tannoy-based confessions.
Definitely loads of tannoy
There will
ones.
be loads of people who would be tempted and go, oh, I'm just going to say a few
Ladies.
words.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt with Matt and Rebecca and Sally and me doing my Floater's voice.
Oh, you were amazing. Larry, it was Larry, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You were amazing doing your Larry impression.
I'm not quite sure, really, whether...
You were channeling your Larry very, very well indeed.
Yeah,
Kind of
in a
Larry
phrase.
Olivier and also Larry, from
Thank
the
you.
band.
Well, it's always nice to have a floater or two.
Moving on, if you have a request for a vintage confession, send over the details that you can remember to confessions@bbc.co.uk and we'll do our very best to dig them out from the crypt.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet the phrase Bobby is a fantasist. Still makes me laugh. Thanks to Harry Grasper, Neza, Ed Roz, Mad Hatter Beth and all the others who tweeted that. This week's code phrase is Poor Mrs. Leamington.
There you go, poor Mrs. Leamington.
Yeah.
And indeed, poor Mrs. Leamington.
Poor Mrs. Leamington.
If you have something to get off your chest, send in your confessions at confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Confessions podcast and you can hear our show, assuming that Joe and I are perfectly healthy, which we will be, from 5 o'clock weekdays on BBC Radio 2. Thanks for listening.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.
Jeremy Vine here. Just time to tell you about the What Makes Us Human podcast. Every fortnight, I welcome a guest from the world of acting, politics, religion, sport, comedy, music, anyone who has interesting things to say. And I ask them the most fundamental question of all. What makes us human? Along the way, we hear a little about them and what makes them tick, but also how they view the world and our place in it. Recently, we've had Robert Webb, Shappi Khorsandi, Akala, and even Sir David Attenborough in the chair right here in the studio. We would love to have you on board, so just search for What Makes Us Human wherever you find your podcasts and subscribe.